welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. How you all doing out there, gang? If you're inspired by podcasts like Tech Talks Daily and want to start your own, I can help with that too. I also provide podcast launching services where I take care of all those tedious tasks like editing and submitting your shows to platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Amazon, and all those usual platforms so you can focus on what truly matters. Just recording a great conversation and leave the rest to me. So it's a question I get a lot. So if you are interested in any of these services and working directly with me, please feel free to reach out. You can get me anytime at techblogwriter@outlook.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always excited to collaborate with passionate individuals and businesses. And together, again, we can create content that not only informs, but entertains and inspires. I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's guest. He is the founder of Ananda Impact Ventures, and he's at the forefront of impact-driven tech startups and scale-ups, leading the charge in ethical investment while ensuring accountability in the tech space too. It's an incredibly refreshing conversation. There is a story towards the end of this episode that will stay with you for a long time. And we will also be diving deep into the current landscape of impact-driven tech companies. So if you've ever wondered about the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and positive impact, and a story that embodies the true essence of kindness in the tech startup world, you will not want to miss this conversation. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Budapest, where today's guest is waiting to join us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Hi, Neil. Thank you for having me. So I'm Johannes. I've been a hustler turned entrepreneur turned investor. Now I'm an impact venture capitalist. I've been doing that for the last 15 years. Started off with my impact VC firm when the term impact investing didn't really exist yet. So we've been through quite a journey here, my partner and I. And yeah, we've built a venture capital firm in the space. We invest on a pan-European level, about 200 million under management, now into Fund 4, which seems such a long time. I'm lucky. I'm still in my early 40s, so I think I still have some time to go as a venture capitalist. And I just want to, I never wanted to be a venture capitalist. I just wanted to build companies that truly matter and that serve real needs and not wants. That's what drove me, and I just found that venture capital would be a good way of doing that. But I still find it very difficult to compare myself to, the normal venture capital market or other people in the area, because it's never something I intended to be. Yeah.
Well, what a great story. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And there's someone right in the heart of this space. One of the reasons I invited you on today was to learn more about the current landscape of impact-driven tech startups and scale-ups. We're seeing a lot of this in our news feeds at the moment, and it's amazing to see the difference that technology can make in our world and the businesses behind that. But can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing and also how these startups are reshaping the business environment and also more impact-driven tech startups? What are you seeing here?
Yeah. So, my partner, he's an engineer. So we started off, we really looked at how can tech change the world. And 15 years ago, it was really hard to find even a company that was, just set up to make the world a better place. So we started kind of investing in low-tech things like, the largest chain of kindergartens, affordable kindergartens in Germany, or a company where autistic people with autism, Asperger autism, work as IT consultants. So that's a tech business, but it's not a deep tech business. And that has evolved massively. So today we see that tech is a great means to the end of, trying to make the world a better place, trying to save our planet. And I see that developing ever faster. So that is really, really great for me to see. I see that there are lots of more specialized funds like climate tech and so on that specialize on a certain vertical, which is great, which shows that the market is growing. And we've helped a lot of funds come into life as well that are now out there playing more generalist roles or thematic roles. Something I'm observing with venture capital in particular is that some of us still believe that we can save the world with software alone. Yeah. I recently talked to a fund of fund, and the manager there, she said, I think I'm indirectly invested into every single carbon measurement software company out there in the world. And I'm I can't hear it anymore, and I think this is, these carbon software measurement companies are similar to the e-scooter companies a couple of years ago. Everybody needs to have theirs, and they're certainly important, but somehow this cannot be the entire solution. So I'm really happy that there's great tech out there, which is also maybe haptic. For example, we just invested into our second satellite company, bringing satellites up into the orbit, which I think makes a huge difference, or environmental DNA to work on, on biodiversity or improve the state of biodiversity. And therefore, there is a lot of tech besides just software as a service, which we, of course, also do. And then I see a lot of startups, which I wish I could invest into, the carbon capturing stuff,
Yeah.
Like we built these weather balloons and we shoot them up in the air and we capture crazy amount of carbon, but then they need to raise 100 million or whatever. And then we just learned that these are not venture cases yet. And I think that's the limitations of venture capital, but it's certainly not the limitation of entrepreneurship in the space. So yeah, tech's going to play a huge role in making our world better. And I think tech is the only chance we have in the end of the day.
And what put you on my radar was reading about your unique impact carry model as well. That's what set off my tech spidey senses. For people hearing about you, for the first time, can you tell me more about that impact carry model and also how it ensures that tech companies meet their impact KPIs? Because you can only improve what you measure, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. When we started off, people were challenges. Okay, how do you measure the impact? And there wasn't a lot of research out there yet. So we kind of had to develop our own system, which has become more sophisticated over time. But before Ananda, I owned an ESG public equity company. And at the time, I realized that we strongly have to differentiate impact from ESG. With impact, you're trying to proactively work towards a positive outcome, while with ESG, you try to avoid a negative outcome. So there has to be a difference, and that difference has to be measurable. It has to be measurable in a way that you don't get on the nerves of your portfolio entrepreneur. And, you run into a situation where he's like, okay, or she might say, do you want me to run a company or report on my impact? So it had to be around these limitations. And we've come up with a solution where we set up at every point of investment a theory of change. So what does the company want to solve with which inputs, which activities, what outputs and outcomes will it achieve? And the whole thing has to be set up that the impact is inherently baked into the business model, which means if the company scales on the turnover side, the impact has to scale in lockstep. Otherwise, it's not investable for us because it would create a lot of conflicts of interest. And then you have a chance to measure it. And we had to decide very early on, do we want to compare a company that works with autists to a company that saves the world from forest fires with satellites? And in a way, we decided that would be like playing God. You would say saving nature is better than saving people, or would be very awkward conversations to have. So what we do is we set KPIs at the beginning of the investment, and we set target values to these KPIs, and we only measure each company, we benchmark it to itself. I think that's very healthy for us humans as well, just benchmark yourself to yourself. And it's similar for companies, right? And then we set these targets. The largest investors of our funds need to agree to these targets and to the KPIs. And then we measure them over time, and we build an average across the portfolio called the portfolio social impact multiple. And if that multiple is at 80% of what we said we would achieve, we can get the full carry, if we also achieve the financial targets, of course. But if it's below, we will not receive the entire target carry. And if it's below 60% of what we said we would do, then even if we 5x our fund, no one would see carry, because then we would have created a mission drift, right? So we would have invested into great companies that weren't making the world a better place. And we have done in 2014, we created it together with the European Investment Fund at the time. And now I think about 80 funds in Europe, and certainly a lot more in the world, are using it. And for me, it's the one single thing I would ask as a fund of fund manager, and even as an entrepreneur: how are you incentivized as a team? Because everything starts there, right?
Yeah. I just love the focus on achieving a measurable impact rather than being distracted by shiny new technology, which we see happen so much. And from there, of course, I was also reading how you write purpose-related clauses into contracts and term sheets for tech companies. So can you tell me a bit more about some of the benefits and challenges of doing that? And maybe share a few examples of why this has been so successful, because it seems such a refreshing approach.
Yeah. So it's another way of, showing a different option to how venture capital or capitalism could work. One approach is the Impact Carry Model. The other one is, how do we want to steer this company? I can see a lot of founders starting off with great intentions, wanting to make the world a better place through what they're creating. And then, somehow over time, they or their investors or their stakeholders kind of, pivot the whole thing into something that's not all that great anymore. And that's a real shame, because that's a lost opportunity. So one of the clauses we came up very early with is a mission drift clause. So we as a fund, we're able to put our shares if the company goes through a mission drift. So it doesn't do anything good anymore for the world, or potentially even has some negative externalities with what they do.
Yeah. And
that helps the company to stay on their mission. It's accepted by all the large VCs we've invested in. It's accepted by all private equity funds we've co-invested with. So that was actually a worry we had in the beginning, but it actually works quite well. And then we started to add additional clauses. So we added a clause on founders' health, which is very important for us. We added clauses on diversity and inclusion. We added clauses on the carbon footprint. And they're all part of the term sheet and then become part of the contracts. And I think it's very important to have them in there because, first of all, it gives you a chance to, discuss them on the board meeting because they're relevant. And it's also great because you discuss them with your co-investors, and lots of these clauses have been adapted by other investors who are traditional investors that don't necessarily intend to create any impact out there. So somehow we are having a positive effect through these clauses, and therefore we'll continue. But they're not highly complicated. It's very straightforward and easy to understand.
And traditionally, looking back over the years, there has been concern that some VC firms talk about impact without any real accountability. So how do you ensure true accountability when investing in impact investing approaches? Because, again, it's a tough balance, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I think there's two things. You need to measure, and you need to be knowledgeable about how to measure. I think that's where it starts. As you said initially, what you measure is what you get.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is you have to look at the person founding the company. Do they truly care about what they're telling you? If they do, and you get good references on that this topic has been truly important for this founder for a longer period of time, then you have a good indication that this is really important to him or her to build this company with that mission. And in the end of the day, there has to be a consequence if the company deviates from its impact and they no longer want to continue, and therefore the mission drift clause is a bit of a hammer which you don't want to pull. We've never pulled it, but it's it just hangs there and everybody's aware of it, and I think that's very helpful. And in the end of the day, you don't want to take things to extremes. You take care of these issues in board meetings and you have good discussions around them. And I think that's what helps you to stay on mission. And other funds, there's lots of other players out there that also want to go down the impact route, but they come from a very different angle and they need to they need to learn a lot, and maybe they don't have the capacity to do that yet, and they haven't employed somebody specifically for the topic, and therefore sometimes they make some rookie mistakes on these topics and then get bad press on it, and it kind of backfires. And I understand that, and I think that if it's an honest quest, then they will end up doing something really great. And sometimes we perceive a bit of impact or rainbow washing right now, which we've seen in ESG and sustainable investing. And I think there will be a point where regulation also steps in. But now we have these SFDR regulations, SFDR 9, for example, which we thought would be a great stamp for an impact fund. But I think there's 890 funds out there right now that are SFDR 9 in Europe. So somehow this cannot be the label for what we are doing as an impact VC fund. So I would say we are SFDR 9 plus if you look at it.
And you mentioned a great word there as well, extremes. And I think so many founders can get carried away and end up working extreme hours, and they're so lost in their passion and vision for the future. And fast growth can also lead to a burnout for both the tech startup and their founders. So I'm curious, how do you help your portfolio of companies balance growth with sustainability and avoiding some of those things?
Oh, that's kind you're asking, because that's really close to my heart. I've seen the limitations of my input very early on in university. I think I had a burnout in university. It was never diagnosed, but I certainly, in retrospect, think it was one.
Yeah.
And I just worked too hard, and I didn't have the instruments to kind of bounce back to be resilient. And I see the same with young founders. They don't have the toolkit yet to be stable. They sound really grown up if you talk to them, but then underneath the first and the second layer, there's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of pushing themselves too hard. There's a huge need for achievement, which could be also very unhealthy and detrimental to the success of the company. And I've recently seen a Forbes statistic. I think 92% it was of all small business owners have experienced a mental health problem in the past 2 years. And 48% of startup founders experience feeling a burnout. 48. That's huge. Even if it's exaggerated, let it be 30. That would be crazy. And if I see how VCs do due diligence on the companies, they look at the market, they look at the product, and they like to look at the founder, but they don't, to my mind, go deep enough in seeing measuring how resilient a founder is at the point of investment, and how resilient a team is, and how positive or negative the dynamics are within that founding team. And that's something we do very early on, even with psychotherapists. We go in during due diligence, try to understand the company on a much deeper level. And that's not to make the life of the founder or the team miserable. It's actually to create a healthy status quo, so we know from which point we will start to work with together. And then we offer interventions. So first of all, a bit of the budgets that we invest, of the money that we invest into the companies, allocated to interventions, mostly coaching. So every founder ideally should have a coach before we invest, or at least at the time after we invested, and they work with that coach. But there's also an element of peer coaching, or talking to your peers. I think that's super important, and we try to facilitate that as a fund. And knowing we're part of the problem, it's a bit perverted, because if somebody already isn't super resilient and they try to build a business, and then you throw a couple of million at the problem, you blow it up exponentially, right? So, and then your investors hold you accountable to that this money is well invested. So at one point in time, you will ask some tough questions on a board meeting, and that could have a certain effect on the founder. And I think being aware of the respective roles is very important. Being aware of the role you play as a VC, that the risk you are taking compared to the risk that the founder is taking, it's skewed, right? So if you lose 2 million on a 100 million fund, that's not comparable to losing 5 years of your life and potentially your house in the next 3 years to recover, as a founder. And I think some colleagues sometimes tend to forget that. And we try to train our younger team members as well. Most of them have been entrepreneurs before, but the ones that haven't, to really understand what the founder is going through. And that's an important part of the equation.
And to bring everything that we're talking about to life, are you able to share some of the leading or maybe even unusual players in the impact-driven tech space that you find particularly interesting or innovative? Because you must hear so many stories and get presented with so many great companies. But again, what are you seeing here?
Yeah, so we see about 5,000 investment opportunities a year. We do 4. I think that's a healthy filter. What I'm truly passionate about is, because we just talked about, is mental health. I think that's really important. We're invested for a long time now in a company called IESO, I-E-S-O Digital Health. They are a provider of online psychotherapy and via text chat, so not even video. And they are quite successful in what they do. They have, during the pandemic, they've done a large chunk of the anxiety and depression topics with cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a therapist at the end of the line, but he's not sitting with you. And actually, lots of clinical studies and the data of the companies show that these interventions can work much better than the physical intervention sitting there with your therapist. So I'm truly passionate about this. Company's growing into the US. We all know that, psychotherapy in the US is a huge market, and it's very much needed. So I think this company will be a great success. They're in their Series B already, raised 53 million lately. And then another one I'm very passionate about, or 2 other ones actually, is Naturemetrics. One, I think I talked about it a little. They create, in simplified terms, the digital twin of the world in biodiversity data. So the founder is truly impressive, Kat Bruce. She recently rode around Britain, or the UK actually. So really, really impressed. And, we are not that much aware of biodiversity problems yet as we are with carbon, because we're not feeling it that much yet. But I'm not sure, you live a bit in the countryside, Neil. So if you drive your car, have you recognized that there's less insects on your your windshield, when you get out of the car?
This is where I'm slightly ahead of my time. Probably a bit of a surprise to everyone listening. I don't drive. But yes, I know exactly what you mean. And I have seen evidence of this. I've seen a few programs and documentaries about it as well, that it is much less now.
Yeah, it is much less so. And what Naturemetrics does is they use a technology called environmental DNA, and they can measure in the soil, in the seas, how the setup or what the biodiversity in this particular area looks like in detail. And that, of course, that data can help a lot of project development companies, people creating offshore wind parks, mining companies, and so on, to make much more sustainable choices in their project development. And of course, there's a much bigger market beyond that later on as well. So I'm really passionate about that company and the technology behind it. And then there's a space company which we finance, new space. It's called Aurora Tech, based in Munich. And they just recently put their second satellite up aboard a SpaceX rocket. And it's every time now that you sit in front of these rocket launches I actually sit there with my kids, and we're super passionate because you can actually see the moment the satellite is deployed. And what they do, basically they measure the temperature of the Earth. And if you measure the temperature, you can measure wildfires. And this way they can find wildfires much more quickly than any other method that's used so far. And right now the world's again burning, isn't it? Yeah. And therefore Aurora Tech, of course, has a huge market. And the carbon that's saved here, if you identify a forest fire earlier, relevantly earlier, because it spreads exponentially, you can have such a huge carbon saving. And I really like it because it's deep tech and it's complicated, and I think it has a huge impact. So I think these companies I'm very passionate about, and there would be lots of others. We have 35, so sorry to any founder whose company I didn't mention, but that's what I'm passionate about.
Love that. Absolutely brilliant. And for any startup founder that could be listening to our conversation today, anywhere in the world, how can founders ensure that they are creating a sustainable, impact-driven business right from the outset? And is there any advice that you'd give to a tech startup looking to make a positive impact, and in doing so, hopefully appear on your radar too?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to doing that. There's something I'd call the McKinsey approach, and I see a lot of founders coming to their solution from that way. They looked at the entire market and they measured which solution would work best, and then they become passionate because of all the data they've collected, and then they come to this assumption that this would create a great business model. And I think that works if you are a very brain heavy person. I cannot relate to that much because I'm very different. I'm very emotionally led, and therefore I think there's another way into this, which goes through, finding your life's purpose. And of course, that's a huge word, but in the end of the day, it means, what are you driven by? What would you do even if you weren't paid for it to do it every day? What could you do every day without getting bored while you do it? If you ask yourself these kinds of questions and you kind of relate them to the world around you, then I think you can arrive at a really great idea of what you want to create next. And I've heard stories from both ends, and I think they can become equally strong.
Fantastic advice. And if we dare to look into the future, I'm going to ask you to look into a virtual crystal ball here. What is the future impact of investing, particularly in the tech sector, and what trends or developments do you possibly anticipate in the months ahead? It's quite amusing. If we look back to November last year, I think nobody predicted that ChatGPT and Gen AI would dominate 2023. But so I appreciate it's a pretty big question, but what do you anticipate in the months or years ahead?
So I think that certain areas of AI will have a big influence on, making the world a better place. We see it in education already. We see it in many other places. We just hired a person who's a super AI expert, and we run sessions with our founders on, how else could we use AI within our portfolio. So this is a strong bet for us. I can see that there will be certain areas that are super hyped, and then they might collapse again. It's a typical venture herd thing that might be going on there as well. And then there's this wish that founders will create these really brave companies where you think, oh my God, is he or she crazy? Or is there something to it? Something that's really industry defining or industry changing. And I believe that it would be through an element of tech, but I hope that it won't just be software. It should be a combination of things, be it in healthcare, be it in climate, be it in education. There should be a real tangible tech component to it. And I think then I would get really, really excited. And therefore that would be more of a wish to the future, but we could see more of the same as well. The true answer is, I don't know, Neil.
Well, we have talked about so many serious topics today, and you've shared insights around how technology, startup founders, and the help of impact ventures can change the world and make a real impact on the world for the better and make a difference with technology. But I suspect out there in the field, and you mentioned, I think, was it 5,000 different initiatives you come across each year, you must have picked up a few war stories along the years. So can you share the funniest or most interesting story that has happened in your career? Because I suspect you've got a few, right?
I think one thing that's lacking in this tech, speed tech environment we're all in is, and that's something that's truly important, and I think generations before us had it on a deeper level, is a thing called kindness.
Yeah.
And in the end of the day, I think kindness will have a much bigger impact on the world than some of the tech we're funding with millions of euros. And I told my team, guys, look, I think what makes us different at Ananda is that we try to be truly kind with the entrepreneurs, respectful and kind that we work with. And I think we can because our investors allow us to be kind with the portfolio companies. And my younger team members said, Johannes, it's great, we're kind, but people might think we are not strong, because we're communicating that we're kind. And I just I couldn't accept that kindness and strength would contradict each other. So we went to London and we were to meet two of the greatest entrepreneurs the city had to offer at the time. And we wanted to back them. And the problem was everybody else did too. So, we met in this restaurant and they told us what they were planning to do. And then I told them a little bit about us, and I started my pitch of kindness. And I looked to my left, and my associate, she started sinking deeper and deeper into her chair, thinking, Johannes, you just kind of completely blew it. And when I had finished, there was this awkward silence, a couple of seconds, or 10, 20, I can't recall. It was too long for it to be comfortable. And then one of the entrepreneurs started to smile at me and roll up his sleeve and showed me his elbow, and on his elbow was a tattoo. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he said, it means kindness.
Oh,
it's one of the most important values in my life, and it made the biggest difference in my life. And I want to run my company that way. And I mean, there were many different reasons why we started to work with each other, but I found it beautiful that, that this is something you can talk about openly, and it actually creates really good conversations and alignment of values.
Wow, that is proper hair on the back of your neck standing up kind of moments. And on this podcast, honestly, in 2,500 interviews, there's a few stories like the one you've just shared there. And it convinces me that the universe is almost looking out for us. And I think when you follow your heart and you're not bothered about what people may think and those uncomfortable silences, and you just go with your gut, it can really pay dividends. Man, what an amazing story that is.
Thank you. That's very kind of you saying that.
And for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about anything we talked about today, maybe a startup founder even wants to appear on your radar, what's the best place for people to find out more information about what you do and how to contact your team? Where would you like to point everyone?
So I think the best way to start is just ananda.vc. That's ANANDA.vc. Then we try to be quite active on our LinkedIn, Ananda Impact Ventures. And, feel free to call us. I think I recently had a session with founders that said they don't get any feedback on their business plans from VCs. And I asked them, did you ever pick up the phone? He said, no. So it seems to be that forgotten medium. And I kind of like it, if somebody really wants to work with us, why don't you just call us? We try to be approachable.
Well, I, for one, have learned so much today about the current landscape of impact-driven tech startups and scale-ups, its investment, future, and leading unusual players that you've come across. And I love how your impact carry model is also ensuring impact targets are met by tech companies and setting up impact KPIs and related targets, etc., with this inbuilt self-checking mechanism. So important. I also love the writing of purpose-related clauses into contracts and term sheets. I think it's the way that tech companies do impact properly. And more than anything, I think that heartwarming story and that pitch of kindness and leaning into the uncomfortable silence, I can imagine everything you went through that day, but an amazing story that will stay with me long after we've finished recording this. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing it with me today.
Thank you, Neil. Truly enjoyed it.
Wow, what an incredible conversation there. A huge thank you to today's guest for sharing his insights and his experiences with us today, from the innovative impact carry model to that pitch of kindness. And as I said in our interview, after 2,500 conversations, one of the things that really stands out to me is that following your heart, listening to the universe. And just when you think you maybe are going down the wrong road, if you are on that right track, it will give you a little nudge of encouragement, a little sign. But you need to look out for that sign. And I think it's evident from today's conversation that the tech world is evolving with a purpose at its heart. And that's got to give us hope, right? So as for myself, I was personally moved by that emphasis on kindness, that story that he shared, and the true spirit of collaboration. And for all you aspiring founders out there, remember to grow sustainably, value resilience, and always look for ways to make a positive impact in the world. So please keep innovating, make the tech world a better place for all of us, be the change that you want to see in the world. And on that cheesy note, I just want to leave and say a big thank you for listening. You and every single one of you that tunes into this. This is why I sit here every day and record 10 interviews a week. So if you'd like to connect with me, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, wherever it is you hang out, send me a message at Neil C. Hughes. I'll get straight back to you. And finally, I cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow. We'll do it all again with another guest. But thanks for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.